Joseph W. Stilwell had spent many years in the service of his country and was already an old man when he was called to greatness. His ordeal was both physical and mental, but he carried on where younger and stronger men fell by the wayside. He was a colorful commander, an inspiring leader, and a great military statesman. His basic mission was to keep the Chinese an effective fighting ally in the Second World War. He carried it out with honor and distinction. Joseph W. Stilwell was born in March of 1883 in Florida, but would spend most of his childhood and early youth in Yonkers, New York. His love of sports was evident from an early age. Like any healthy young boy, Stilwell also had a mischievous side and was sometimes a discipline problem. His family felt young Joseph would benefit from a regimented environment, and so in 1900, Joseph Stilwell entered the military academy at West Point. Ironically, the decision would prove to be a fortunate one for our nation. Young men with qualities of courage and leadership would be needed to serve the nation through years of crisis. Hints of these qualities can be detected between the lines of a yellowed class yearbook. As a young quarterback, Stilwell led his teammates to victory, teammates that would, in later years, serve under him on fields far more important than the practice fields at West Point. Graduation from the academy did not end Joseph Stilwell's alliance with the school. As a newly commissioned second lieutenant, he spent the next 11 years teaching foreign language. His natural aptitude for this subject proved to be as fortunate for the nation as his decision to make the military his profession. When he wasn't at the academy, he was assigned to service schools and tours of duties in the Philippines and at home. Meanwhile, history was setting the stage for the first of this century's major crises, worldwide conflagration. In its flames, untried American leadership would be tested and tempered. Joseph Stilwell would be among those to receive his baptism of fire. With the temporary rank of major, Stilwell disembarked in France in 1917 during the bleak, disheartening month of December. He served with the British for a brief period of time, and then, because of his fluency in French, became liaison officer for the 17th French Corps. With the war over, it was Colonel Stilwell who went on to serve with the Army of Occupation in Germany, where he remained until July of 1919. Because of his talent with languages, Stilwell's next assignment took him to Peking to study and attain fluency in the intricate world of Chinese dialects. His wife and 3 children joined him in China, and while they were there, 2 more children were born to the Stilwells. Their comfortable home reflected his growing appreciation of Oriental art, and he was considered a connoisseur. To the Chinese people around him, the perceptive Stilwell brought his own humane understanding, cultivating mutual respect and warm regard. One day in the future, these qualities helped forge military victory. In the meantime, he served his country well wherever he was stationed. Joseph Stilwell's next assignment was at Fort Benning's Infantry Training School. Among his classmates, George C. Marshall and Omar Bradley, names that would become household words when the nation went to war. He went on to Fort Leavenworth's Command and General Staff School for several years of study. Then, once again, it was back to China as military attaché to the United States Embassy in Beijing. There he remained, as the conflicting interests of Japan and China led to incident after incident, and then inevitably to all-out war. The armed forces of Japan were well prepared, for the political and military clique which held power had long anticipated this day. The overall plan was to decimate China, destroy her province by province. Meanwhile, the Rising Sun's modern Air Force focused on destroying China's will to resist. The courage of the Chinese, in and of itself, proved to be an ineffective defense against the finely tuned military efficiency of the enemy. On hand as an observer was Colonel Joseph Stilwell. It became his growing and unshakable conviction that the Chinese soldier was a first-class fighting man with first-class leadership. Chiang Kai-shek, the one leader able to preserve Chinese unity, was now forced to withdraw to the interior city of Chongqing, from where he desperately sought to enlist the aid of other nations. When an American ship was sunk by Japanese bombers while in Chinese waters, American sentiment, long inclined to sympathy for China, crystallized. At first, aid for the Chinese arrived in the form of young Americans acting as private citizens who volunteered their services. One such group, the Flying Tigers, were winning fame as they took a heavy toll on the Japanese Air Force. China's armies began receiving arms and equipment from her allies. Japan, not at all happy that China was receiving supplies, systematically occupied or blockaded one after another of China's port cities. In effect, the Japanese built a wall around China. As the situation in China worsened, Stilwell, now a major general, was back home, serving at California's Presidio in command of the 3rd Army Corps. Step by step, history was setting the stage for a worldwide drama in which Joseph Stilwell would emerge to play an heroic role. Once again, Stilwell was sent to China to serve as chief of staff for General Chiang Kai-shek and to take nominal command of China's 5th and 6th armies. Along with his new position, Stilwell received his 3rd star. China's defenses needed to be built up and maintained until her allies could join her in going over to the offensive. However, her allies were, for the moment, occupied in other theaters of war. General Stilwell's first job was to protect Burma, which offered the only route by which material aid could be fed into China. The Burma that greeted Stilwell had ceased to be a modern Eden of song and romantic fiction. It had instead become a battlefield. General Stilwell and his Chinese soldiers, together with British, French, and Dutch troops, fought bravely, but their effort was doomed. The Japanese steamroller pushed on. They dealt humiliating defeats to the Allies all across the Pacific and in Southeast Asia, and then rolled across Burma. India's borders lay exposed to attack, and the last vital land route to China, the Burma Road, was severed. Once again, courage alone was not enough. For the Allies, withdrawal became retreat. Retreat, a nightmare. During the ordeal, Stilwell's true nature revealed itself. Refusing the comforts his age and rank warranted, he personally escorted a troop of 400 battered Burmese nurses and civilians to the safety of India. There, at New Delhi, he was to utter the now classic admission of defeat and announce his determination to set things right. "I claim we got a hell of a beating," he said. "We got run out of Burma, and it's humiliating as hell. I think we ought to find out what caused it, go back, and retake the place." Here was the honesty, the directness, the tough moral fiber that characterized the man. The battered campaign hat and shirt sleeves now became a familiar sight as the job of regrouping and training began. The job of delivering supplies to the besieged China now fell to the limited number of transport planes that the Allied command could spare. Forced into an around-the-clock schedule, these transports were also bringing in the manpower that would be needed for the return to Burma. In one such operation, 14,000 troops were carried without loss or mishap. Limited in number, too, were the planes needed for training the thousands of Chinese flyers and other units which must continue the aerial war against the enemy. The Flying Tigers became part of regular fighting forces, flying under the leadership of General Claire Chennault. Joseph Stilwell set another goal for his men, This one seemingly impossible. Cutting a new road, the Lido Road, through incredibly treacherous land, bypassing the severed link of the Burma Road. Modern machinery and skilled workers were available to clear the road in India. On the Chinese end, it was a far different story. It would take back-breaking manual labor using primitive tools to get the job done. Men, women, and even children threw themselves into the Herculean task. The Chinese people knew what was at stake, and they responded. At an Allied leadership conference in Quebec, greater aid and a newly organized Southeast Asia Command were authorized. The Supreme Commander was to be British Admiral Lord Louis Mountbatten, and his deputy, Lieutenant General Joseph Stilwell. Suddenly, the hitherto ignored operations in China captured the imagination of the outside world. The increase in material aid, while welcome, was making greater demands upon air transport. Every type of plane available was used. Many of them lacked modern instruments, making flying in the unpredictable weather precarious. Their route took them over uncharted and treacherous mountain terrain. The stockpile for the coming battle was mounting. The tools were now ready and waiting to help settle an old score. The sideshow war had been remembered. Air power was the prelude to ground attack. Fighters and bombers of the newest types arrived in increasing numbers to sustain the fiery assault. The day had come. Men from China and all parts of the British Commonwealth, from India and Burma and Africa, men of all different races and languages were on the march. General Stilwell's polyglot army also included a growing number of American units. Among them were General Frank Merrill's troops, who were experienced fighters from the Pacific Theater. Merrill's Marauders, as they became known, would help make history. In the 2 years of preparation, General Stilwell had molded a machine to beat the enemy at his own game: mountain and jungle warfare. While many casualties were inflicted by the modern weapons of war, greater losses occurred from malaria, dysentery, hepatitis, and a wide range of tropical diseases. The enemy and the illnesses were as crippling here as in any other theater. For the men, Burma was no sideshow. Supplies for the men in their isolated pockets of warfare often had to come by airdrop. In twisting, mile-deep canyons and jungle-covered terrain, a drop that missed by a few hundred feet may as well have missed by a few hundred miles. Despite the hardships, Stilwell went everywhere his soldiers did. To the millions who served under him, he was Uncle Joe, the kindest and most modest man who ever lived. The bluntness of his speech also earned him the nickname of Vinegar Joe. Without a doubt, there were saltier names coined in the ranks. Doubtless, too, Joseph Stilwell chuckled over them in private. The term soldier's soldier is certainly overworked, but Joseph Stilwell, who faced the same hardships and dangers as his men, gave the phrase real meaning. He embodied the unique capacity for commanding respect and obedience while evoking a genuine affection. Perhaps no group regarded the general and the man with warmer feelings than did the Chinese troops in his command. It was no secret that General Sir, as he was called, had consistently extolled their courage and promoted their welfare, often in the face of adverse opinion from above. Now they repaid his loyalty with an unbroken string of Chinese victories in the field. Elsewhere in southern Burma, the Salween and Irrawaddy rivers were back in the news. But now these were scenes of success, and it was the enemy who yielded as British-led Allied forces reclaimed more and more of Burma's soil. North and south, it was the same story. An old humiliation was being erased. 2 years after the retreat from Burma, the 61-year-old general could see that his timetable for victory was on schedule. A birthday celebration was a pleasant event and a well-earned respite from the daily grind. The presence of his son, Colonel Joseph Stilwell, Jr., made it a family occasion as well. However welcome or pleasant, such interludes were few and far between. The war in both South and North reached its climax. The enemy knew well that each mile of ground lost in northern Burma meant another mile added between India and China. Under Stilwell's leadership, the Lido Road was growing. On the heels of combat troops came the men who were carving out that road, often under enemy harassment. The land itself resisted their efforts. Jungle growth would completely reclaim and obliterate in 2 weeks' time the work that neither the enemy nor disease nor climate had been able to halt. Against the enemy, there was the rifle always close by. To fight the soil, every weapon from the axe to explosive charge was employed. As General Joseph Stilwell pushed on and the enemy grudgingly yielded, the mule trail became a road. And in relative safety, engineering expanded the road into a solid truck route. As it neared completion, the derisive phrase, "impossible road," was heard less often. It stretched across jungle-covered plateaus. It bridged rivers untamed since creation. It traveled across mountain ranges, narrowing the gap between India and China. Then, inevitably, came the great day, the day when the first convoy could travel its 1,044-mile length. The enemy had been pushed out of northeast Burma, and the way lay clear. Considering the difficulties and hardships that had been borne in shaping this seemingly endless serpentine route, there seemed merit in the words of an American colonel who at the outset had said, "You don't have to be crazy to do this job, but it helps." Yet as the first convoy rode into Kumang, a mere token of what was to follow, the Lido Road became a reality. In honor of the man who had weathered military defeat and political opposition, who had overcome impossible odds, it was renamed the Stilwell Road. 4 months later, Allied command announced total victory in Burma. And what of the man who had built the road and forged that victory? The tides and cross-currents of events had taken him far from what should have been his hour of triumph. Receiving his 4th star, General Stilwell came home to America. Then it was off to the Pacific for a tour of battlefronts and installations. During the next few months, he became commander of the 10th Army and later served as commanding general on Okinawa. But whatever the assignment, the Stilwell story remained unchanged. He was still blunt, unassuming Uncle Joe, the general with no patience for pomposity and pretense. He was still the gaunt, typical American who somehow resembled the symbolic figure of Uncle Sam. More important, he was still Joseph Stilwell, the general with an understanding of men in the ranks and a talent for winning their affection. As the summer of 1945 came to an end, so did history's most devastating war. On September the 2nd, aboard the battleship Missouri, General Douglas MacArthur submitted the formal surrender terms to a defeated enemy. An end had come to the agonies of a tortured world. Peace had come, in victory, and with honor. Once again, General Stilwell was assigned to the Presidio, but now as a prelude to a well-earned retirement. His loving family and home were in nearby Carmel, where he planned to pass the rich years that lay ahead. But a new enemy struck, an enemy from within who would not be defeated. On October 12, 1946, after a short illness, stout-hearted Joseph Stilwell died. By his own instructions, ceremony was omitted. His ashes were strewn over the Pacific Ocean, whose waters play against the shores of beautiful Carmel. Today, at West Point, the general's old campaign hat and combat boots are treasured mementos. There hangs, too, a portrait to record Joseph W. Stilwell's career of service to his country. To the men there, he stands as an example of, and an inspiration to, greatness. A remarkable man. A remarkable life. Joseph W. Stilwell. A hero.